end well, is it? So we have the Feast of Ascension, the Feast of Ascension this past Thursday, which follows directly after. So the 40 days of Pascha are over. The 40 days of Pascha ended Wednesday last week, and then you have the Feast of the Ascension. And then this Sunday, which is sort of like in between, it's this strange in-between zone, right? So we're not singing Christ is risen anymore, but we're also not doing any prayers to like the Holy Spirit yet, right? So like, and that will start on Pentecost. In this particular Sunday is the Sunday of the Fathers of the First Ecumenical Council. That was the council in like 325 that was dealing with this, there was famous characters like Arius, and it was dealing basically with the idea of like whether or not Jesus was fully God and how much God was he. And that's the thrust of it. And so today, that's the feast we commemorate. And the gospel reading that we read was from John, which is that particular section of the gospel that was read today is called the great high priestly prayer of Christ in the Gospel of John. John's the most theological gospel that we have, and that particular section within John is the most theological section of John. So you have things in there like that they may be one even as you and I are one. There's a lot of language there that Jesus uses to describe his relationship with the Father, and how he's God. And so that's why that's read. It's read in light of the First Ecumenical Council as sort of for an example of the oneness of God. And so, but the question I want to pose is why does any of that matter? Especially when you dive into like the council and what they were teaching. There's all these kind of crazy words like consubstantiality and a lot of these what are really technical, philosophical, and metaphysical terminology applied to try to understanding or defining at least or setting down some boundaries of the divinity of Christ. And it's easy to think sometimes, why can't we just say Jesus is fully God and fully man and just move on? Why do you take all this technical language and or you think to yourself, I'm just a simple Christian, I just, live my life. And the reality of it is what we think, the ideas and concepts we have actually matter in that they do determine how we behave, how we act, the values we have, and how we live our lives. A lot more than you think. And this is not just true in sort of theological stuff, but it's true with everything. So we often like to think, I'm not a real big thinker, I'm just a simple guy, and I just live my life. But the reality is that we are all under the influence of other people's philosophies and ideas all the time, whether we realize it or not. We adopt certain beliefs and ideas all around us without realizing it. And sometimes we can really tell what we believe when we're put into sort of a crisis or an argument or some sort of trial that tests us. You get in an argument and then you blurt something out and then you realize what you actually believe or you realize what that other person maybe actually thinks about you. And so sometimes it's in these trials or these tests that we actually find out what we really value or what we really think. And sometimes we often do not know ourselves as well as we think or really understand how much the ideas of other people affect us. And so, this is true. We think, people in academies, and universities, they think all this stuff. They just live in ivory towers. They have more influence on your life than you think. The ideas that people come up with are ways of seeing and thinking about the world. And the way you think and see about the world really does determine how you're going to behave and react, what values and priorities you're going to set. And so whether you're aware of it or not, you are under the influence of the ideas that other people have thought of. Okay? And sometimes it's even deeper than that. It's that even if you don't like those ideas or you reject them, you still live as if those things are true. So this is called sort of like the tacit dimension of belief. That is, you will run into people who may be like, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in any of that stuff. But yet they will still act as if God exists. They will still behave in such a way as if someone's watching them or as if they're accountable or as if there's some sort of judgment or accounting for their life in the end in some way. And so, and that's not true with everybody, but with many people that is the case. And so there is this sort of tacit or lived dimension to our lives that even if we don't verbalize, right, a certain belief, we act and live that belief out, which really in many ways is probably the deeper sort of evidence of a belief than sort of just being able to verbalize it or be conscious of a certain belief is how is that belief actually lived out in some way. What does that have to do for this feast? Well, the fathers realized the same thing, that ideas matter. What you think about things, the words that you give things, they make a difference. They make a difference in how we think about God. And so in the case here, it makes a big difference because how Jesus is God and to what extent he is God and whether or not he is fully God or not has huge implications for how we think about salvation. And really how God and man relate, how God relates to the world. And so what our lives should actually look like and what we should be aiming for. And so they had this clarity of vision to know that the ideas and the words and the arguments, as obscure as they seemed, actually would make a huge difference down through the ages if the wrong sort of ideas were put forth to be believed in. And so thankfully we have people in the church, and we have people in society who can do a lot of this heavy thinking and who have been able to sort of work through some of these problems for us. But it doesn't sort of get rid of this idea that we should all, and this is what I want the take home to be, is to just be aware of the fact that ideas matter and that we're under the influence of other people's ideas and beliefs, whether we're really fully aware of it or not. And so how we think about things really does matter in a lot of ways. The opposite sort of, I think, danger is that people can get really caught up in all of the minutia of different theological arguments and debates, and so they start to define their faith or their Christianity, right, on whether or not they have all these sort of theological propositions sort of lined up in the right way. Oh, I believe this, check. I believe the right thing about this, check. And so I thought through everything very carefully, and so I have all my ideas. But see, that's the thing, like, Christianity isn't just a bunch of ideas that you have, right? It's a life that you live. It's a lifestyle. It's a way that you live. And so our ideas, yes, they make a huge difference, but they make a difference in as much as they make a difference in how we live. Right? See, that's why ideas are important. Not so much in and of themselves, but in terms of how they determine how we behave, the choices we make, the priorities that we have. And so that's the importance of ideas, because this is the thing is some people, they'll get all caught up in whether or not, they believe this thing or that thing about Jesus and, and the Holy Spirit and everything. But then they'll neglect the weightier matters, which are, am I treating my wife well? Right? Am I practicing self-control? Am I loving other people? Am I willing to sacrifice in some way? And so those are always the most important things. And so if you look at what the fathers do, right, historically, like in this council and others, their concern is always this, pastoral, right? In the sense that they're concerned about the practical implications of certain ideas and thoughts. And so their real concern is always how do we help people, protect people, and make people spiritually well? That's always their concern. And so the church never sort of goes out of its way to sort of set down definitive dogma about questions that nobody's asking, right? It's always reactive, right? It never goes out and says, well, we're going to set down some theological boundaries just for kicks. It's always in response to some sort of crisis or problem that emerges that the church comes and does these things. And it always does it in a very conservative way, in that it tries not to say too much, because it's always aware of this, that the more you say about God, the more likely you are to be wrong. And the less you can let yourself say, the more right you will probably be, because you're dealing with an infinite being who's beyond any conception that you could have. And so, that's why we use the word mystery to describe things like the incarnation, or his resurrection or things like that is because they're really beyond us fully grasping it with our minds. And so they really have to, the mystery has to be lived and participated in, not necessarily understood in its entirety. And so the church often, when it sets down dogmas, what it's doing is, this is the analogy I like to think about, is imagine like a sheepfold, and you're a shepherd, and there's these like rocks and pits and thickets where your sheep keep getting stuck and break their legs in. So what do? You put little fences, right, around these danger spots. That's what the church does theologically. It puts little verbal, right, theological like fences around areas that are dangerous. So instead of trying to say exactly what God is, the church is actually, most of the time, tries to say what God is not. Because it's a much safer way to go about, and it's less constraining of God. So that's the Feast of Nicaea, and I just want to leave that take home, is that ideas matter more than we think, and we should be aware of sort of the ideas and beliefs that we are absorbing and that live and abide in us, and how those ideas and beliefs and concepts that we hold do affect our way of life. Lord Jesus Christ.